Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first of what will probably be several video lessons by me. Before we get started, I just want to check to make sure that all of you watched the short TED Ed video on zombie nouns. If you haven't watched that yet, stop this video lesson and go watch that. Otherwise, you'll be probably pretty lost later on in this lesson. That's a really short video, kind of entertaining, but it will explain an important term that you'll need to know for this lesson. So go ahead and do that if you haven't done it already. Okay, well, let's move ahead. So this is with this lesson, we're getting into a different kind of different kind of territory when it comes to writing and grammar. What we're going to be looking at starting today is not so much a grammatical rule. It's not necessarily a problem of grammar in the sense that we're not going to be dealing with things that are grammatically incorrect, that break certain rules that have to be followed, right? Like you have to be grammatically correct, you have to have a complete sentence, right? You can't just use a subordinate clause as your sentence because it's not an independent clause. That would be a rule, okay? We're not really dealing with rules here. What we're really getting into is style, okay? And by that I mean, how do we make our writing not just grammatically correct, but also good? How do we make it engaging? How do we make it a little bit more clear for our readers? Yeah. So here's a sentence. Now this isn't a bad sentence. It's not a. It's a grammatically correct sentence. There's nothing wrong necessarily with the grammar of this sentence. So let me read it. Our analysis of the results of the experiment did not provide an explanation of its failure. Yeah. So as I said before, there's nothing wrong grammatically with this sentence. Nothing wrong with the punctuation. Nothing wrong with the word choice and word order, things like that. But I'm gonna show you a different version of this sentence. It expresses the exact same idea, just in a different way. Here it is. We analyzed the results of the experiment, but we could not explain why it failed. Now, as I said before, these two sentences say the exact same thing, but they say it in different ways. And if we were to ask a group of people, if I were to ask you, for instance, which one you thought was better, chances are you'd say B. Most people would say B. B is better than A. The second version of the sentence is better than A. But if I were to ask you why is B better than A? That would probably be a little harder to answer. Chances are some people would say something like this: it just sounds better than A. You guys know how I feel about that answer. I would ask, why does it sound better? Right, and that's a tough thing to articulate. Some people might say something like this: well, sentence A is more maybe more abstract, sounds more abstract than B. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think it's probably a good feeling. Or they might say that B isn't as boring as A. The version, if you compare it to B, sentence A, it just sounds a little bit more boring, and I think that's true. I would agree anyway. I think though that none of these answers really help us understand mechanically why B works, why we like the sound of B better than A. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do with this lesson, is help you guys understand exactly what's going on with the language and the structure of sentence B, so that we can actually write more sentences like B and fewer sentences like A. Okay. So I would say, at least a first step in this direction is to kind of take all of these things that we're responding with and understand this, that one of the things that makes B better than A is that it's clearer. It has more clarity than sentence A. Okay, but again, why is it clearer? What do we mean by clear in this sense? Okay. If there is a kind of an underlying rule or guideline or premise to this lesson, this is it. Good writing is clear writing. And there are a lot of ways that we could define good writing, and a lot of it depends on the kinds of writing that we're talking about. But when we talk about sentence level writing, paragraph level writing, good writing is writing that is clear to the reader, and where the meaning and the ideas come across as clearly and as effectively as possible. Okay? So this lesson is the first of many where we will hopefully come to a better understanding of how to make our writing more clear. Before this, I want to tell you guys a story. Okay? You've heard this story before. Maybe you haven't heard it in this way, but you're all familiar with this story. I'm going to use this story to illustrate this point, and we'll come back to those original sentences in just a bit. But here's the story. Once upon a time, there was Little Red Riding Hood, Grandma, the Woodsman, and the Wolf. The end. What do you think? Do you like that story? Probably not, right? Yeah. We're familiar with these people, and you've heard versions of this story before. But if I were to tell you this story, if I were to read this story, say, to my kids at bedtime, they'd be pretty upset. They'd be pretty bored. What is wrong with this story? I'll give you guys a second to think about this. Let's ask our crowd of people. What do they think? Yes. Yeah, so a good story, or a story in general, needs action, needs to have something happen. There's nothing happening in this story. We've got people, Little Red Riding Hood, Grandma, the Woodsman, the Wolf, but they're not doing anything. There's no action. So a story needs action. All right, so here is, let's add some action to the story, shall we? Once upon a time, as a walk through the woods was taking place, a jump out from behind a tree occurred, causing fright. Is that better? We have action, right? Well, what's wrong with this version? We have action, right? A walk, we have a jump, we have fright. Somebody's getting frightened. What's missing from this one? Right, the people. Okay? So here we traded action for people, or people for action. So a story needs characters. A story actually is nothing without characters getting into some kind of conflict. So we need a story needs characters, and it needs actions. So let's revise this again. Here's a story with characters and action. Once upon a time, as a walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf's jump out from behind a tree occurred, causing fright in Little Red. How's that? You guys like that better? Yes, I would agree with you, crowd. This version does suck. But why? Right? We have action, we have a walk, we have a jump, and we have the people, right? On the part of Little Red Riding Hood. We have the wolf's jump out from behind a tree occurred. Now we know who was frightened, causing fright in Little Red. So we have actions, we have characters, but yet we still don't necessarily like this version of the story. Okay? Let's compare that version of the story to a different version. Okay? So I just read you version A, which we said sucks to some extent. Here's version B. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the woods when the wolf jumped out from behind a tree and frightened her. Like the crowd here, most of us would probably say we prefer version B. B is better. Just like in our last pairing of sentences, we like the second version better. Okay? But why? Again, what makes B better? Okay. All right. I'm going to show you exactly what makes B, why we like the sound of B better than A. So let's take just one clause from that story of Little Red Riding here. Okay, so on the left we have a clause from version A. The wolf's jump out from behind a tree occurred. Over here we have a clause from version B. The wolf jumped out from behind a tree. So the first question we need to answer is this: what's the action in these sentences? Okay, both of these Both of these sentences are telling the same story, more or less. What's the action in this story? It's jump, right? That there's a jump happening. Somebody's jumping, right? In this case, the wolf. The wolf is jumping. The wolf jumped out from behind a tree, or the wolf's jump out from behind a tree occurred. So that's the action. Okay, if we were to picture this sentence in our mind, this is the action or the movement that we would visualize. Now, here's a different question. What's the verb? Okay, what is the grammatical verb in that particular clause? I'll give you a second to see if you can identify them. On the left here, the verb is occurred. The wolf's jump out from behind a tree occurred. Over here, the verb is jumped. So in version A, right, our action is jump and our verb is occurred. In version B, the action is jumped, but the verb is also jumped. All right, next question. If the action in the story is jumping or jump or the movement jump, then who is doing it? Who's the character, right? Remember, a story has character and action, so who's the character doing the jumping? Well, in both of these stories, the character is the wolf. Okay? If this little clause here, if this sentence is a story, this is the main character of the story. It's the wolf, right? The wolf and his jump. That's what the story's about. But what happens when we ask this question? What's the subject, the grammatical subject of the sentence? Who is the subject doing the verb? Okay. If the verb on the left here in sentence A is occurred, then what occurred? Was it the wolf? No, it was the wolf's jump. Right? Over here, what jumped? The wolf. Right? Do you see a pattern now? This is the version of the story that we like better. This is the version of the story that we feel is more clear, tells the story more clearly. Can you begin to see now why we like version B better? Give you a second to think about it. Here it is. In version B, the actions, go back to this slide here, the action is conveyed by the verb of the sentence. The action and the verb are the same thing. Similarly, the character who is performing the action is expressed as the subject of the sentence. So the reason that we liked, in both of those the pairs of sentences that we looked at, the reason we like version B better is that the actions are conveyed by the verbs. Okay? Here again, and the characters are the subjects of those verbs. So Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the woods. Okay? Up here, it's a walk through the woods was taking place. Okay? So you see in this clause here in version A, as a walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Little Red Riding Hood, the subject of that clause is a walk through the woods, and the verb is was taking place. Okay? Here, though, Little Red Riding Hood is the subject, and was walking through the woods is a prepositional phrase. So Little Red Riding Hood is the subject, was walking is the verb of that clause. Okay? So that's the rationale. Okay, that is the basic principle that we're looking at today. If we want to make our writing more clear, then we should try to do this. We should try to make sure that the action in our sentence, whatever that action may be, we want to make sure that, try to make sure that that action is conveyed by the verb. Okay? And that the character who's performing that action should also be the subject of the sentence, the grammatical subject of that sentence. Okay? All right. So let's go back to our original sentence and see how we can diagnose this using this principle of clear writing. Okay. Our analysis of the results of the experiment did not provide an explanation of its failure. What are the actions? if you can visualize this might be harder to visualize than the Little Red Riding Hood example, but if you were to close your eyes and visualize this sentence, what's happening here, what actions are being performed or were being performed? You see it? Here they are. Analysis. Okay. Somebody, the people here, who maybe are writing or saying this sentence, they did some kind of analysis. Okay. Our analysis of the results of the experiment did not provide an explanation. So providing an explanation, okay, providing something, that is another action. And here as well, failure. Okay. Something failed. Okay. So 3 actions, essentially, in this sentence. Oops. What's the verb? If these are the actions, right, what's the verb of the sentence? You may have already seen it because I kind of gave it away. It's did not provide. So the action, one of the actions, at least in the beginning, is analysis, but the verb of our sentence, okay, is did not provide. Uh-oh. We go back to what we learned from the Little Red Riding Hood story. We can see a problem. Our action does not match our verb. Okay. A little late. Yep, there you go. They don't match. Very good. Right. So that's a problem. Okay, who's the character? Who is the character here? Okay. It's us. Or we, right? This is implied by our. Remember, the action is analysis. Who or what is doing the analysis? It's our, okay? Or we. We're the ones who did the analysis. Now, what's the subject of the sentence? You know what it is? If the verb is did not provide, then what did not provide? What didn't provide an explanation? Is it us? No. It's our analysis. The analysis that we did not provide an explanation of the experiment's failure. Okay? So our analysis is the subject of the sentence, but the analysis isn't the character. We are the character. Characters typically are people or animals, things that can perform an action. The action in this case is analysis, and we are the ones who did the analysis. So again, those don't match. Now, you may have already done this, or you may have already noticed this, but if you haven't, you should note that our 3 actions in our sentence, analysis, provide an explanation, particularly this word, and then failure, these are all nominalizations. This is why I asked you guys to make sure that you watched that video on zombie nouns first, because this is the term it explains, nominalizations. These 3 terms, analysis, explanation, and failure, are all noun forms of verbs. That's what a nominalization is. Noun forms of verbs. Verbs that have been turned into nouns. They can also be adjectives turned into nouns, but typically it's verbs. Yeah. So if we were to restore these nominalizations back to their original forms, analysis would become, can you guess? Analyze. Explanation would become what? If you give an explanation, you are explaining. Very good. And failure, failures are noun. What's the verb? To fail. Right. Fail or failed. Okay, these are all just the present tense. We're going to have to change those in a minute, but these are the present tense verbs that all of these nominalizations are based on. Okay. All right. So we have seen what the problem is in this sentence. The character is not the subject of the sentence. The subject actually is the action. Okay? The action is not expressed in the verb. So how do we change this? How do we revise? Okay, so first, what we want to do is we want to attack those nominalizations. Okay, we want to make sure that our actions are going to be expressed as verbs, not as nouns. Okay. So analysis then becomes analyze, explanation becomes explain, and failure becomes fail. And now we may need to change the tense of these verbs. We can do that as we fine-tune the sentence in a bit. Okay, now obviously this sentence doesn't make sense as it is. Our analyze of the results. No, we have to fix that. All right, did not provide and explain of its fail. So now this sentence doesn't make sense, but we've changed those nominalizations back to verbs. So what's the next step? We need to make the characters the subjects. So who's doing the analyzing? We, right? We. So here is the first clause of our sentence. We analyzed the results of the experiment. Okay? So instead of our analysis of the results of the experiment, now we have we is the subject, analyzed is the verb. Analyzed is the action, and we is also the character. Okay? We analyzed the results of the experiment. The next clause becomes this. But we could not explain. Again, we is the subject, okay, or the character, but it's also the subject of our clause. We could not explain. Could not explain is our verb. Okay? So remember, providing an explanation was an action. Now it's expressed as the verb rather than the nominalization explanation. Okay? But we could not explain. Now what we're left with is this part here. It's failure. Okay? But we could not explain. What could we not explain? Why it failed. Okay? So you'll notice that when we revise a sentence like this, okay, we're going to have to probably change the order of words a little bit. And we may need to add some words, okay, or delete some words. As in but. We didn't have a but up here, okay, but we had to add that to make the sentence make sense, just like why, right? An explanation is kind of like a reason, and when we get into a reason, then we're getting into words like why. So we could not explain why it failed. Okay? It now is the subject of failed. Okay? It referring back to the experiment, of course. We could not explain why it failed. Okay, so you can see it seems like a minor difference, but it's actually not a minor difference. Its failure is a noun phrase. Its failure. Failure is the noun. It's is the possessive pronoun. But here is a little clause. It failed. Okay? It is the subject. Failed is the verb. So now we had three clauses here in this sentence, and now all of those clauses have a character as the noun or as the subject, and a verb as the action as the verb in those clauses. Okay, I hope that was mostly clear. I've put some practice, a few practice sentences on the agenda for today. So I'd like you to do your very best to try to make those sentences more clear using the principles that we've learned. The first couple practices you'll get are going to be a little simpler. I'll identify the nominalizations for you, and then kind of gradually try to wean you off of that so you can identify the nominalizations. Okay? If you have any questions about this, if you're confused at all, please don't forget to check in with me between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. We can even do a video chat if that would be easier, or whatever you would prefer. So best of luck, and try your very best. All right, thanks.